What happens when a flight attendant ignores an elderly woman, thinking she's just another quiet passenger? The shocking twist will leave you questioning everything about how we judge others. The bustling airport was filled with the usual hum of voices and the shuffle of shoes against the polished floors. Passengers hurriedly made their way to the gate for a flight heading to a major city, eager to reach their destinations. Among the crowd, an elderly black woman walked slowly but steadily. She was in her early 70s, her silver hair pulled back neatly, her posture dignified despite the visible signs of age. A cane rested in her hand, but she carried herself with quiet strength, her eyes alert as she observed the crowd. She approached the gate area, where a young flight attendant was handling the last of the boarding tasks. The attendant was a woman in her mid-20s, her uniform perfectly pressed but her attention scattered. She was darting back and forth, checking tickets, directing passengers to their seats, and handling last-minute instructions. She was, it seemed, overwhelmed by the chaos of the boarding process, and her focus was on everything but the elderly woman who had just arrived. The elderly woman, with a polite, measured voice, attempted to get the flight attendant's attention. "Excuse me, dear," she said, her voice calm yet clear. "Could you please help me with my luggage? It's a bit heavy for me." The flight attendant, barely glancing up, offered a quick nod, though her eyes remained fixed on a young couple just ahead of the woman. She didn't stop, didn't pause. She gave the elderly woman no more than a fleeting acknowledgement, brushing her off with a distracted wave of her hand. Without making eye contact, she continued moving, clearly more focused on the other passengers around her. The elderly woman stood there, a slight frown forming on her face, but she said nothing, waiting for the attention she never received. The elderly woman stood in place for a moment, her cane pressed against the floor as she waited for the flight attendant to return. Her hand tightened slightly around the handle of her bag, a silent indication that the dismissal had not gone unnoticed. She straightened her shoulders, keeping her composure, but there was a subtle tension in her posture now, just enough to reveal her frustration. She wasn't angry, not outwardly, but the hurt from being ignored hung in the air. She had asked for a simple favor, one that most passengers would expect, and yet it seemed as if she had been invisible. The flight attendant continued her work, not once returning to the elderly woman. Instead, she engaged with a younger couple in the aisle, smiling and joking as if the elderly woman had never spoken. Her actions became more dismissive, as though the woman simply didn't matter in the rush of boarding. She didn't seem to notice the growing discomfort around her, or perhaps she didn't care. The people nearby started to notice the interaction, or lack of one. A few of the passengers, observing the scene, exchanged glances. One older man, sitting a few rows away, shook his head slowly, his expression filled with quiet disapproval. Another woman, a middle-aged white passenger, gave the elderly woman a brief, apologetic smile, though she didn't speak up. Some passengers, especially those with darker skin tones, seemed to empathize immediately, casting sympathetic looks in the woman's direction. But not everyone reacted the same way. A group of younger passengers, mostly from other backgrounds, appeared oblivious to the situation. Their eyes passed over the elderly woman, disinterested as they continued chatting amongst themselves, unaware, or perhaps uninterested in the growing tension. The divide was clear. Some saw the injustice, others remained indifferent. As the plane cruised smoothly through the sky, the tension from the boarding incident seemed to dissipate, but a quiet unease lingered. The elderly woman, still composed, settled into her seat, her cane now resting beside her. She gazed out of the window, her eyes thoughtful, though there was an unmistakable air of quiet authority about her. The flight attendant, who had been busily serving drinks and assisting other passengers, came by once again. The woman barely glanced up as the flight attendant approached, her demeanor polite but distant. The flight attendant, her tone still distracted, asked if she needed anything else. "No, thank you," the elderly woman replied, her voice calm and steady, though there was an underlying hint of something more. Then, without fanfare, the woman spoke again. "I do hope this experience will be different next time. I am the CEO of Holden Enterprises." The flight attendant blinked, clearly not processing what she had just heard. "Excuse me?" she asked. her voice faltering slightly as she tried to make sense of the statement. The elderly woman didn't repeat herself. Instead, she let the words hang in the air. It wasn't until another passenger, sitting nearby, gasped that the reality of the situation began to sink in. Holden Enterprises? That's the company that... The words trailed off as the connection clicked for several passengers. The elderly woman was no ordinary traveler. She was a highly influential figure, the very person responsible for shaping major aspects of the industry. Whispers spread like wildfire through the cabin. Some passengers were stunned, their expressions a mixture of shock and disbelief. The flight attendant, pale and flustered, tried to apologize, but the woman simply smiled softly, offering nothing more than a gentle nod. The flight attendant's face turned a deep shade of crimson as the truth sank in. Her eyes widened, and she stumbled over her words, suddenly aware of her grave mistake. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, her voice cracking. "I didn't realize who you were. Please, let me make it up to you." She stood there, unsure of how to make amends, her hands trembling slightly as she wrung them together. The elderly woman watched her, still calm, her expression unwavering. She could have scolded the flight attendant, could have demanded more apologies, or even retribution. But instead, she simply smiled softly, the corners of her lips lifting gently. "There's no need for that," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "We all make mistakes, and that's all right." The flight attendant, clearly flustered, hesitated before nodding, grateful for the woman's understanding. She had expected anger, perhaps a harsh reprimand, but instead, she was met with kindness. The elderly woman continued, her tone serene. "You see, it's easy to judge others by what we see on the outside, to assume things based on appearance or age. But the real measure of a person is their character, how they treat others, regardless of who they are." The words hung in the air, and a noticeable shift in the cabin's atmosphere occurred. The flight attendant stood frozen, absorbing the lesson with a quiet humility. Around them, the other passengers were also listening, their expressions thoughtful. Some exchanged knowing looks, realizing the depth of the situation. The elderly woman's grace had spoken louder than any reprimand could have. It was a humbling reminder to everyone: never judge, never dismiss. Everyone deserved respect, no matter their appearance or age. As the plane descended toward its destination, the elderly woman remained calm and collected, her serene composure unshaken by the earlier events. The flight attendant, now deeply reflective, hovered nearby, offering water and asking if there was anything more she could do. The tension between them had eased, but the atmosphere was different. There was a sense of quiet acknowledgement between them, a shared understanding that would linger long after the flight ended. As the plane touched down and the passengers began gathering their belongings, the elderly woman turned to the flight attendant one last time. "You know," she began softly, "I believe everyone deserves a second chance. Perhaps we can turn this into something positive." The flight attendant, startled by her words, looked up. "What do you mean?" The elderly woman smiled, her eyes warm but purposeful. "I could use someone like you at my company, a position perhaps, something to help you grow, and for us to learn from one another." The offer was simple, but its impact was profound. The flight attendant, struggling to find the right words, managed a quiet, "Thank you, I don't know what to say." The elderly woman nodded. Sometimes, all it takes is a little humility and an open heart. As the flight attendant stood there, watching the woman exit the plane, she felt a shift within herself. She had learned an invaluable lesson, not just about respect, but about recognizing the depth of people beyond their surface. The passengers, too, had absorbed something powerful, some walking away with a renewed sense of kindness, and others reflecting on how they viewed the people around them. The story ended with a message that would stay with them all: never underestimate someone based on their age, race, or appearance. True respect lies in seeing the humanity in everyone, regardless of what they seem to be.